Hey everyone, Cody Hayes here, and I'd like to welcome you to part three as we look at the Gospel of Luke and where we left off. And I was running out of time, but the birth of Jesus in Luke. And I mentioned how the stories, of course, are different in Matthew and Luke, which both tell the birth of Jesus but do so in a different way. And kind of one thing to add to that, or a couple points to add to that, is during one of my religions of the world classes, where the first portion of Christianity, I go over the differences regarding the birth of Jesus. And a student came up to me afterwards and said, I didn't know that there were differences regarding Jesus's birth in the Gospels in the Bible, which, yes, obviously there are. And when I was an undergrad, there was a class that I took called Jesus of Nazareth, and it was in the fall semester. So, because it was in the fall semester, um, the class would have still been in session when Advent started. Of course, Advent leads into Christmas. And the professor that I had asked the class the question after going over the differences in the birth stories. Would you tell the average person in the pew, the average person in church, the story as they always have heard it, which of course is taking the stories in the Gospels regarding Jesus and forming one chronology? Or, in the case with the birth stories, would you mention that there are differences? And I remember one student responded, I think that for their sake, I would just tell them the story as they always heard it. So, moving forward a little bit here with Jesus in the temple and his ancestry. While absent from Matthew's Gospel, Luke's Gospel presents Jesus at the age of 12 in the temple in Jerusalem during the Passover festival, and this event is also found in the non canonical Gospel of Infancy Thomas. Infancy Thomas, it's a proto Gospel. It's often thought to be Gnostic, although Jesus comes across as all too human in that Gospel. Of course, it is non-canonical, but that doesn't change its historical importance, and arguably it was written maybe around the same time as the Gospel of Luke. But the account that we are most familiar with is the one in Luke, and that's where, as Mary and Joseph are getting ready to leave and go back to Nazareth, they don't find Jesus among them, so they're searching for him, and they find him in the temple, and he is having a conversation among the Jewish scholars there in the temple, and they are amazed at how knowledgeable Jesus is at 12 years old. And Mary approaches him and says, son, where were you? Your father and I were looking everywhere for you. And Jesus, says, well, why were you looking for me? Don't you know I need to be about my father's business? And after the reference to Jesus in the temple at 12, we have no record of his life, whether it's canonical or non canonical, until the start of his ministry at around the age of 30. There is a Gnostic text called the Book of Baruch, which is no relation to the work that's part of the Deuterocanonicals, that's part of the Hebrew Bible, or is what Christians would call the Old Testament, that's attributed to Jeremiah's scribe. But there's a Gnostic work called the Book of Baruch, which mentions Jesus at the age of 12 tending some sheep in Nazareth. But other than, say, a reference like that, of course, we're still at the same age here, 12. We don't have any record of his life until the start of his ministry at around the age of 30, and there's been all these legends about what was Jesus doing for a period of 18 years. And the truth about probably what he was doing would destroy the mystique that's been created around him. What Jesus was probably doing was odd carpentry jobs in and around Nazareth. That's really what he was probably doing for a period of 18 years. Luke provides a chronology which shows Jesus' Davidic lineage, but it traces his ancestry back to Adam. So it's a different chronology from what you find in Matthew's Gospel. Whereas Matthew's Gospel also shows the Davidic lineage that Jesus has, but it traces his ancestry back to Abraham, the father of the faith, the biblical patriarch. Whereas Luke, it also shows the Davidic lineage, but it traces Jesus' ancestry back to Adam, the first man. And another question here, is the chronology in Luke the maternal side of Jesus' family? The bottom image that I have on the screen is of the Holy Family, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, with Mary's parents, Anne and Joachim, or Joachim. And an argument has been made that Luke's gospel shows Mary's side of the family. And there are theological arguments for making this case. One is that it traces, in this case Luke, Jesus' ancestry back to Adam. One of the titles of Mary is that she's the new Eve, and Luke's gospel favors Mary very well. Another argument that's made in this favor is that Heli, who is listed as the father there at the start of the chronology, that Heli is a variant of Joachim or Joachim, which by variant, what I mean is that it's derived, from that name, kind of like Jesus is derived out of Joshua, there's a variant there, or James is derived out of Jacob, there's a variant there. So the argument is that this is showing, Mary's side of the family. And like I said, you can make a theological argument in support of that. You can make an argument in support of that, but it's not explicitly clear. So move forward here to the Sermon on the Plain in the Gospel of Luke. Have here, blessed are you and woe to you. Well, the individuals who receive the blessings are often those who are among the downtrodden. Blessed are you who weep and woe. One day you're going to laugh. And then the woes are often those that inflict individuals to be downtrodden, who inflict their suffering. Like one of the woes or the curses is to the wealthy. Now, it's not, an issue of somebody, being wealthy that necessarily causes them to be cursed or woe. That's not the point. It's that, do those individuals that have means, do they do things that contribute to somebody's suffering? To think of it another way, there's the statement, the golden rule, treat others as you'd like to be treated. But there's another variant to the golden rule, which is the statement, he who has the gold sets the rules. And that is, someone with wealth basically creates a society based on his or her purposes. And often that inflicts those that aren't able to fight back. So in that case, somebody would be among the woes because you're contributing to somebody else's suffering. Well, I think that we'll stop here, and when we come back, when we return, there will be another element of the Sermon on the Plain, and then, looking at my notes here, we'll get into one of the well-known parables from the Gospel of Luke, which is the parable of the Good Samaritan. So take care. I will symbolically see you then.